Dawn arrived bleak and overcast on the 28th of July, 1914, casting its grey light across Newcastle upon Tyne, an industrial powerhouse in England's northeast corner. Coal dust, metallic smoke, damp steel, and ocean brine filled the morning atmosphere. The River Tyne's banks echoed with the relentless percussion of countless hammers striking steel throughout the Armstrong-Whitworth facilities. This was where empires forged their might, where the 20th century's deadliest instruments took shape. The cacophony was overwhelming, an industrial orchestra proclaiming Britain's maritime supremacy worldwide. Each rivet hammered home, each steel section joined together, represented raw dominance. Yet this particular Tuesday, every laborer, technician, and spectator fixated on one colossal shape commanding the waterfront. Floating in the dark, fitting-out basin waters sat a true leviathan, the battleship Sultan Osman. To merely call her a vessel felt insufficient. She was a floating fortress of steel, a temple dedicated to warfare. Her length measured nearly 700 feet bow to stern, surpassing 2 consecutive football pitches. Her exterior bore the slate-gray coating of contemporary dreadnought design, engineered to vanish into combat fog. This massive hull pushed aside over 27,000 tons of seawater. Her superstructure towered skyward like a steel peak, crowned with observation stations and targeting directors. Yet her most fearsome aspect remained her armament. 7 enormous turret assemblies rose from her deck, housing 14 12-inch cannons, an unprecedented concentration of heavy naval firepower. Her design permitted unleashing approximately 7 tons of explosive ordnance in one salvo, sufficient to obliterate an entire city quarter or shatter any opposing warship afloat. This vessel embodied the zenith of maritime engineering, a weapon system capable of unilaterally shifting regional power dynamics. Standing dockside beneath this steel colossus were 500 men markedly different from Newcastle's pale workforce. Red fezzes with black tassels adorned their heads, Mediterranean sunshine had bronzed their features, Turkish and Arabic flowed musically from their conversations. These elite Ottoman naval personnel, chosen representatives of an empire spanning from Balkan territories to Arabian deserts, had journeyed 3,000 miles to claim their vessel. Months had passed living aboard a transport ship moored nearby, anticipating this moment. Cramped and uncomfortable conditions had failed to dampen their enthusiasm. Days were devoted to mastering the gun turrets, sophisticated hydraulics, learning the steam turbine intricacies that would propel her at speeds approaching 21 knots. Evenings found them praying toward Mecca on cold English decking, envisioning their triumphant homecoming to Istanbul. Letters dispatched homeward described this magnificent warship with reverence and national pride. For these sailors, the Sultan Osman transcended mere machinery. She represented salvation itself. She embodied their nation's aspirations in steel form, a tangible guarantee that past humiliations would never recur. They understood that back home, millions awaited them. They knew Istanbul's Golden Horn was festooned with banners, that children rehearsed welcoming songs throughout the capital's streets, that the Sultan himself prepared ceremonies destined for historical remembrance. Departure was scheduled precisely 5 days hence. Coal bunkers sat full with thousands of tons of Welsh coal, ammunition stores held carefully inspected shells, the Turkish ensign lay folded, ready for hoisting in national triumph. Yet they remained unaware that 300 miles southward in a high-ceilinged Whitehall office London, a decision was forming that would crush their dreams and ignite global catastrophe. Winston Churchill, First Lord of the Admiralty, occupied his expansive mahogany desk, studying a North Sea chart. Pins and pencil annotations marked fleet positions and naval installations. At 39 years, Churchill held this post as the youngest appointee in modern memory. Brilliant, energetic, and supremely confident, he believed determination and boldness could overcome any challenge. A substantial cigar smoldered as blue smoke drifted across urgent telegrams cluttering his workspace. Each dispatch conveyed increasingly dire developments. European news was catastrophic. The continent slid toward annihilation. Archduke Franz Ferdinand's assassination in Sarajevo exactly 1 month prior had triggered diplomatic collapse now accelerating toward avalanche. Austria-Hungary was crushing Serbia. Russia mobilized its enormous military apparatus to defend Serbian interests. Germany, continental master, prepared to strike France through neutral Belgium according to the Schlieffen Plan. Churchill's attention, however, remained fixed on maritime matters. He recognized that should war arrive, and arrival seemed inevitable rather than possible, Britain's survival depended entirely upon Royal Navy dominance. This island nation imported most foodstuffs. Severed sea lanes meant starvation. The Grand Fleet required capacity to annihilate Germany's high seas fleet and maintain the economic blockade that would strangle German industry. Mental calculations commenced. British dreadnoughts, 22 capital vessels. German dreadnoughts, 15 capital vessels with additional units under construction. The superiority margin appeared dangerously narrow. German fortune, perhaps through British ships striking mines or suffering submarine attack during war's opening phase, might shift the balance. Britain could forfeit the war within a single afternoon. One decisive fleet engagement could determine imperial and global destiny. His gaze repeatedly returned to foreign warship lists under construction in British facilities. Two names confronted him prominently: Sultan Osman I and Reshadia, two super dreadnoughts representing their generation's peak capability. And they belonged to the Ottoman Empire, whose allegiance remained uncertain. Churchill confronted a nightmare scenario. The Ottoman Empire maintained technical neutrality, yet anyone comprehending regional geopolitics recognized growing German influence in Istanbul. Germans had cultivated young Turk relationships for years. German officers trained Ottoman ground forces. German engineers constructed the Berlin-Baghdad Railway. What if the Turks sailed these vessels home, then within weeks or months joined German forces? What if British-constructed warships, the finest afloat, were employed sinking British vessels throughout the Mediterranean, bombarding British-Egyptian installations, threatening the Suez Canal, the Empire's arterial lifeline? This risk Churchill refused to accept. He addressed First Sea Lord Prince Louis of Battenberg with words destined for historical echo. "We cannot permit these vessels to be used against us." Legal ramifications held no significance for him. Moral considerations remained secondary. The Ottoman government's full payment, every penny transferred to British banking institutions, constituted merely a detail within imperial calculations. Churchill decided upon confiscation. To comprehend this betrayal's magnitude, we must examine the dying Ottoman Empire's circumstances. By 1914, Europe knew the empire as the sick man of Europe, terminology coined decades earlier by Tsar Nicholas I of Russia. This represented slow collapse tragedy, a funeral procession continuing 2 centuries. For 200 years, Russians, British, French, and Austrians had torn Ottoman territorial chunks away, like carrion birds dismembering a carcass. Greece fell to revolution and British intervention. Serbia succumbed to nationalism. Bulgaria yielded to Russian expansionism. Egypt fell to British occupation, though nominally remaining Ottoman until 1914. The ultimate humiliation arrived in 1912 during the Balkan Wars. A coalition of minor Balkan nations, Greece, Bulgaria, Serbia, and Montenegro, attacked the empire in what they termed liberation warfare, though truly representing territorial seizure. The outcome proved catastrophically disastrous. Ottoman armies, poorly equipped and incompetently led, suffered complete defeat. Refugees flooded Istanbul by hundreds of thousands, bringing massacre and defeat accounts. Yet the cruelest blow arrived from maritime forces. The Greek navy, minuscule compared to Ottoman fleets on paper, had acquired one modern armored cruiser from Italy, named Georgios Averov. The Averov demonstrated modern naval warfare capabilities. Superior speed and gunnery exceeded anything Turkish forces possessed. She could engage at extended ranges, pounding Ottoman vessels beyond their effective response distance. During 2 decisive engagements, the Battle of Ely and the Battle of Lemnos, the Averov single-handedly terrorized Ottoman naval forces. She blockaded the Dardanelles, the narrow strait connecting the Aegean with the Sea of Marmara and Istanbul beyond, preventing Ottoman troop movements by sea, effectively severing European provinces from reinforcement capacity. The entire Ottoman fleet remained bottled within the straits, unwilling to emerge. National humiliation reached unprecedented levels. Turkish populations watched from Istanbul's hills as their antiquated ironclads, earlier-era relics, retreated before a solitary Greek warship. Psychological impact proved devastating. Following the conflict, the new Young Turk government, led by Enver Pasha, Talat Pasha, and Jamal Pasha, vowed never to repeat such disgrace. These modernizers and nationalists sought to propel their empire into the 20th century. They understood that contemporary geopolitical reality defined sovereignty through dreadnought possession. Naval capability determined maritime control, power projection capacity, and diplomatic credibility. retaining remaining Aegean islands, protecting coastlines from Greek expansion, and preventing further humiliation required vessels capable of crushing the Avarov and any future Greek acquisitions. Yet Ottoman treasuries stood empty. The empire drowned in debt accumulated through decades of warfare and fiscal mismanagement. European powers controlled Ottoman finances through the Ottoman Public Debt Administration, an international entity collecting taxes for foreign creditors. How could a bankrupt nation afford Earth's costliest weapon systems? Individual dreadnoughts cost as much as entire provincial annual budgets. The solution emerged as the Navy League. The government launched a campaign combining fundraising with religious revival, appealing directly to popular patriotism and religious sentiment. Battleship acquisition became a sacred cause. This transcended mere military strategy. It represented restoring Islamic and Turkish national honor. The campaign framed participation as sacred obligation, defending the faith against Christian powers seeking to dismember Islam's final great empire. Scenes throughout the empire proved extraordinary and profoundly moving. Grand Bazaar merchants in Istanbul established collection points beside their establishments, decorated with battleship imagery and Ottoman banners. In remote Anatolian villages, peasants who had never glimpsed the sea and could scarcely feed their families walked for days to the nearest town donating grain bags or single sheep. Imams delivered sermons declaring every lira contributed represented ammunition fire defending the faithful, fasteners in hulls protecting Muslim territories. Women assumed central campaign roles. In this traditional conservative society where women typically remained within domestic spheres, women emerged in unprecedented fashion. They organized charity bazaars selling handcrafts and confections. They donated jewelry, their most precious possessions. Documented accounts describe women removing gold bracelets from their wrists, dowries representing their sole financial security within patriarchal society, dropping them into Navy League velvet pouches. Stories circulated of schoolgirls cutting their long hair for sale to European wig manufacturers, donating the modest proceeds. Elderly women surrendered wedding rings. The campaign became national obsession, a collective sacrificial act uniting people across class and ethnic divisions. The government issued recognition medals and ribbons. Small contributions earned ribbons. Significant donations received bronze medals called Donanma Madalyası, the Navy Medal. Silver and gold medals recognized wealthy merchants and landowners. Wearing these medals publicly became honorable badges. Entering coffee houses without Navy League ribbons invited suspicious glances, as though you were treasonous or miserly. This represented total national wealth mobilization, collective determination demonstrating Ottoman patriotic depths. With this gold river flowing into Istanbul, the government went shopping. Britain was selected because despite political tensions and centuries of rivalry, Britain remained naval engineering's gold standard. British shipyards constructed the world's most advanced warships. The Rashadi order went first to Vickers Shipyard in Barrow-in-Furness, a solid, formidable modern battleship. Then, a unique opportunity emerged. Armstrong Shipyard in Newcastle was constructing a monster vessel for Brazil, named Rio de Janeiro. Brazilians ordered it to win a South American naval arms race against Argentina and Chile, rival powers also purchasing dreadnoughts. Then, Brazil's rubber boom collapsed. Rubber prices, Brazil's wealth source, crashed when British and Dutch Southeast Asian plantations commenced production. Brazilians could no longer afford the vessel. It sat partially completed, seeking buyers, representing massive Armstrong-Whitworth financial exposure. The Ottoman government struck like a hawk sighting prey. Navy League accounts were emptied. High-interest loans from French bankers eager to maintain Ottoman friendship were secured. They purchased Rio de Janeiro, renaming her Sultan Osman I after the Ottoman dynasty's founder. Sultan Osman's specifications were bizarre and terrifying. Because Brazilians wanted to impress the world and intimidate neighbors, they demanded maximum gun quantities regardless of practical implications. Most battleships mounted 8 or 10 heavy guns. Sultan Osman carried 14, unprecedented armament. She was a glass cannon, lightly armored compared to British or German vessels, yet packing devastating striking power against anything afloat. The design gambled that firepower could overcome protection. Thus we return to July 1914. The ships were fully paid. Final gold installments had transferred to the Bank of England. Technically and legally, Sultan Osman and Rashadiye constituted sovereign Ottoman territory, as much imperial property as Istanbul's palace. Yet in Newcastle, The atmosphere was shifting. Captain Ralph Bey, commanding the Ottoman mission, began sensing change. Ralph Bey was a national hero, a daring naval officer who had led audacious Balkan Wars raids, infiltrating small torpedo boats past enemy patrols. He was perfect to captain the flagship. He had established good relationships with British engineers, learning their language, sharing meals. Yet during July's final week, British managers stopped maintaining eye contact. Conversations became evasive. Meetings were postponed without explanation. Churchill had dispatched secret orders on July 29th. It was bureaucratic obstruction mastery. He instructed shipbuilders to delay departure by any means necessary, but subtly. Invent technical problems, claim hydraulic pumps needed testing, report ammunition hoists were malfunctioning, suggest coal bunker restacking for proper weight distribution, use any excuse, but prevent those ships' departure. Ralph Bey was no fool. Daily shipyard visits with mounting frustration demanded answers. He observed the vessel humming with activity. Smoke poured from funnels as boilers were stoked. Provisions were loading, food crates, freshwater barrels. Yet attempting to walk the gangway, British foremen blocked his path with polite excuses and apologetic shrugs. Ralph Bey dispatched frantic encrypted telegrams to Istanbul. "The British are stalling. I fear they intend seizing the ships." He requested permission to board forcibly if necessary and break harbor before too late. Yet the Istanbul government, paralyzed by unfolding European crisis and fearing British provocation, ordered patience. They believed British honor would prevail. They couldn't believe the Magna Carta nation, the society priding itself on legal principles, would commit such brazen theft. On the morning of August the 1st, 1914, the charade concluded. Churchill had received intelligence that Germany was about to declare war on Russia. Continental powers were mobilizing. Britain would likely enter war within days. He could wait no longer. Requisition orders were issued. A battalion of British infantry from the Sherwood Foresters Regiment marched down Newcastle's cobblestone streets in full combat gear, rifles slung, bayonets fixed. Local residents watched confused as soldiers marched through shipyard gates, taking positions surrounding the dry dock. Maxim machine guns were positioned on tripods, aimed at Sultan Osman's gangways, prepared to eliminate resistance. Captain Ralph Bey arrived at the dock finding his vessel surrounded by bayonets. A senior British officer, rigid and formal, approached him, handing Ralph Bey a letter on official government stationery. It stated His Majesty's government was exercising preemptive requisition rights due to national emergency. Ottoman crews were ordered to collect personal belongings and depart the area immediately. No negotiation would occur. The scene embodied crushing humiliation. Turkish sailors who had polished brass and scrubbed decks, who had learned British workmen's names and shared cigarettes with them, watched as Royal Navy bluejackets marched aboard, assuming their stations. They watched British officers enter the captain's cabin Ralph Bey had prepared. The Ottoman flag, the red crescent and star, was lowered from the stern in deliberate ceremony. The Royal Navy's white ensign rose in its place, snapping in the wind. Ralph Bey stood on the dock, fists clenched, fighting tears of rage. He was a warrior, trained to suppress emotion. Yet in this moment, he felt national tragedy's weight. He understood what this meant. This wasn't merely losing a ship. This was a slap to the entire Ottoman nation's face. This was London's message that Turks were not equals, that their property and honor meant nothing against British interests. He gathered his men. They boarded the transport ship, returning them to Istanbul, faces masked in fury and sorrow. The homeward journey became a funeral procession. They returned empty-handed. They faced millions who had contributed their gold. They had to tell schoolgirls their hair had been sold for nothing. They had to explain to elderly women that their wedding rings had purchased betrayal. When news reached Istanbul, the reaction was volcanic. Today, living in a different world, we struggle to comprehend the anger's intensity. This wasn't merely governmental political dispute. This was personal robbery. Every man who had worn a Navy League medal felt Churchill had reached into his pocket and stolen his money. Newspapers screamed for blood, running revenge headlines. Navy League posters depicting ships steaming to glory were torn down or draped in black mourning crepe. In Dolmabahce Palace, the Ottoman cabinet descended into turmoil. The government was divided. Grand Vizier Said Halim Pasha, a moderate, wanted maintaining neutrality. He argued the empire was too weak for fighting, that entering war would be suicidal. He wanted negotiating with Britain for compensation, demanding at least money return. Yet War Minister Enver Pasha was a different man entirely. Enver was 32 years old, ambitious, ruthless, and a fervent German admirer. He had served as military attaché in Berlin, dazzled by German efficiency and military power. He wore a German-style mustache and spoke German fluently. He believed Germany represented the future and Britain the past, a declining empire clinging to outdated superiority notions. For months, Enver had attempted pushing the empire into German alliance. Other ministers had resisted, respecting British naval power and fearing British retaliation. Yet now Churchill had handed Enver the perfect weapon, a rallying cry. Enver stood in the cabinet meeting, slamming his fist on the table. "Look at what the British have done," he shouted. "They treat us like slaves. They steal our ships. They spit on our honor. How can we trust them? The Germans treat us like warriors. They offer us an alliance of equals." Indeed, the Germans quickly capitalized on the crisis. Kaiser Wilhelm in Berlin saw the opportunity immediately. He knew the Ottomans were furious. He knew they felt defenseless without their fleet. He realized that solving their naval problem could win them over and open a new front against Russia. Germany had a Mediterranean naval squadron commanded by Admiral Wilhelm Souchon, consisting of the battlecruiser Goeben and the light cruiser Breslau. Goeben was magnificent, not as powerful as Sultan Osman, but faster and battle-hardened. She had already seen Adriatic action, earning a reputation for speed and aggression. On August the 3rd, as war erupted across Europe with Germany invading Belgium and Britain issuing ultimatums, German High Command sent a secret radio message to Admiral Souchon: "Proceed to Constantinople." This order initiated one of history's most dramatic naval chases. Souchon was in the western Mediterranean near Algeria, having just bombarded French ports. Reaching Istanbul required sailing nearly 1,000 miles east, directly through British naval dominance. Hunting him was the British Mediterranean fleet led by Admiral Archibald Berkeley Milne, a cautious officer who had risen through connections rather than brilliance. Milne commanded a massive force: 3 battle cruisers, 4 armored cruisers, and 4 light cruisers. He outnumbered Souchon 10 to 1. It should have been easy elimination. British ships were faster with more guns. It should have taken hours. Yet Souchon was a sailor of immense skill and determination, possessing one advantage: desperation. He knew he couldn't return home. The British controlled Gibraltar Strait. He couldn't enter the Atlantic. His only hope was the Dardanelles. He ordered full speed. Goben's engines suffered boiler tube failures. Coal quality was poor, producing more smoke than heat. Yet Souchon drove his men relentlessly. Inside boiler rooms, temperatures rose above 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Stokers fainted from exhaustion and heat stroke. German officers stood with drawn pistols, not to shoot enemies, but to ensure men kept shoveling coal into furnaces. It was a race against time and fuel. The British fumbled the chase through a series of errors that would haunt Milne for life. Admiral Milne was cautious, worried about protecting French troop transports crossing from Africa to France. He received confusing orders from Churchill in London. He hesitated when he should have attacked. Souchon slipped through the net. He engaged in running battles with British light cruisers, but his heavy guns kept them at bay. He reached the Aegean Sea running on fumes, coal bunkers practically empty. He had to stop at a Greek island purchasing coal from a merchant vessel, violating neutrality laws, but survival was all that mattered. On the afternoon of August the 10th, 1914, Goeben and Breslau arrived at the Dardanelles mouth. The strait entrance was guarded by massive Ottoman forts with rows of heavy guns and rows of naval mines blocking the channel. Souchon stopped his ships. He radioed the Turkish fort commander: "I request permission to enter." This was the moment deciding the Middle East's fate. Enver Pasha was in the War Ministry when the message arrived. "The German ships are at the gate. The British fleet is close behind them. If we let them in, we violate neutrality. If we keep them out, the British will sink them." The Grand Vizier hesitated. He knew allowing entry was effectively an act of war against Britain, even if not officially declared. Yet Enver Pasha didn't wait for consensus. He acted on his own authority, seizing the moment. He sent a message to the forts: "Open the minefields. Let them in." As boom nets parted and German warship gray shapes glided into the strait's calm waters, the British vanguard appeared on the horizon. They were merely hours too late. The door had slammed shut. Yet now a diplomatic crisis erupted. British ambassador in Istanbul, Sir Louis Mallet, stormed into the Grand Vizier's office demanding the German ships be interned. Under international law, neutral countries must arrest crews and disable weapons of any belligerent warship entering their ports. The Ottomans were trapped. They couldn't arrest Germans because Enver wouldn't allow it, yet they couldn't admit sheltering them without declaring war, which they weren't ready to do. Someone, perhaps a German diplomat, perhaps a Turkish minister, conceived a stroke of genius, a lie so bold it altered reality. The Ottoman government released an official statement. "We have not sheltered these ships. We have bought them. The German government has kindly agreed to sell us Goeben and Breslau to replace the 2 ships the British stole from us." It was pure theater. No money changed hands. The ships remained German property in every legal sense, yet the propaganda value was immense. Turkish people, who had been mourning their lost ships, suddenly erupted with joy. The British stole our ships, so the Germans gave us new ones. It was poetic justice, a fortune reversal. On August the 16th, a ceremony was held in the Golden Horn that was surreal even by war standards. The German naval ensign was lowered from Goeben's stern. The Ottoman flag with the crescent and star was raised. The ship was renamed Yavuz Sultan Selim, after one of the most feared Ottoman sultans. Breslau was renamed Midilli. Yet there was a problem. The Ottomans lacked any sailors trained to operate these complex German turbines and fire control systems, so German crews didn't leave. Instead, uniform crates were brought aboard. German sailors, blonde-haired, blue-eyed men from Hamburg and Kiel, removed their marine uniforms, donning Ottoman uniforms. They put on fezes. Admiral Souchon, the German aristocrat, wore a fez and was appointed commander-in-chief of the Ottoman Navy. The British ambassador watched this masquerade with fury. He knew they were still German ships. He knew orders still came from Berlin. Yet the diplomatic fiction held. Britain was not yet ready to fight the Turks while battles still raged on the Western Front. For 2 months, the Yavuz sat in harbor, a loaded gun pointed at Russia's heart. Peace hung by a thread. Moderate ministers in the Ottoman government tried desperately to keep the empire neutral. They argued they now had their ships, so they could stay out of war. Yet Enver Pasha and Admiral Souchon had other plans. They had secret Kaiser orders: bring Turkey into the war, open a new front to distract Russians and British. Souchon grew impatient. He was tired of sitting at anchor. He was a warrior, not a diplomat. He wanted to fight. In late October, he approached Enver. They hatched a plot to force the government's hand, to create a crisis making neutrality impossible. On October the 27th, Admiral Souchon took his fleet, the Yavuz, the Midilli, and a squadron of Turkish destroyers, into the Black Sea. He announced he was conducting a training maneuver, a routine exercise. He steamed north into cold gray waters toward the Russian coast. He ordered radio silence broken only by battle commands. On the morning of October the 29th, 1914, citizens of the Russian port Sevastopol awakened to thunderous roaring that shook windows and rattled dishes. They looked seaward and saw a massive battleship flying the Turkish flag, firing heavy shells into the harbor. The Yavuz pounded the Russian naval base. Shells crashed into warehouses, docks, and ships. Simultaneously, Midilli shelled the port of Novorossiysk, sinking 14 transport ships and igniting massive oil storage tanks. Smoke from burning oil turned day into night, a black cloud visible for 50 miles. It was a sneak attack, a Black Sea Pearl Harbor. Souchon had done it. He had committed an act of war so flagrant, so brutal that there was no returning. When news reached Istanbul, moderate ministers were horrified. They tried drafting an apology to the Tsar. They tried claiming Souchon had gone rogue, acting without orders. Yet Russians were not interested in apologies. They had been attacked by Turkish ships flying Turkish flags. On November the 2nd, Russia declared war on the Ottoman Empire. On November the 5th, Britain and France declared war. The sick man of Europe had thrown away his crutches and picked up a gun. The Middle East was at war, and it all started because Winston Churchill wanted to save 2 ships. The Black Sea raid was the point of no return. As Russian oil tanks burned in Novorossiysk, war fires began consuming the Middle East. In London, Winston Churchill received the news with grim determination. His nightmare had come true. The Ottoman Empire had joined the Central Powers. The Dardanelles were closed, cutting off the vital supply line to Russia. The Suez Canal, the British Empire's jugular vein, was now within striking distance of Turkish armies. Churchill, the man who prided himself on strategic vision, felt his own decision's weight pressing down on him. He had stolen Sultan Osman to protect the Royal Navy. Yet in doing so, he had handed the enemy a strategic victory far greater than 2 battleships' value. He needed to fix it. He needed a knockout blow that would vindicate his decision. His eyes turned to the Dardanelles map, that narrow, winding strait separating Europe from Asia and leading directly to Istanbul. Churchill conceived a plan that was audacious, daring, and ultimately doomed. He believed the Royal Navy was invincible. He believed that sending a massive battleship fleet to force the straits could blast Ottoman forts into dust, sail up to the Golden Horn, and aim guns at the Sultan's palace. The Ottoman government, he believed, would panic and surrender. The sick man would die of fright. It was a plan born of arrogance, ignoring history's lessons. It ignored the fact that ships fighting forts almost always lose. Forts have stable gun platforms. They can't sink. Yet Churchill was convinced. In February 1915, a colossal armada gathered in the Aegean Sea. It included the most powerful ships in the British and French navies. And in an irony twist that would make a Greek tragedian weep, one fleet ship was HMS Agincourt. Agincourt was the renamed Sultan Osman I, the very ship that had been stolen. It was now sailing to attack the people who had paid for it. Turkish gunners in the forts, looking through binoculars, would have recognized its silhouette. They knew its gun numbers. They knew its turret shapes. Seeing their own stolen property bearing down on them, flying the enemy flag, filled them with cold, resolute fury. They were not just defending their capital, they were fighting a personal vendetta. The naval attack began on February the 19th. British ships unleashed a steel storm. The noise was deafening. Continuous rolling thunder audible in Istanbul, 40 miles away. Agincourt with its 14 12-inch guns fired full broadsides that shook the sea itself. Ottoman forts crumbled under the impact. Stone walls built centuries ago disintegrated. Yet the Ottomans had a secret weapon. It was not a battleship. It was a small, insignificant mine layer named Nusret. While the British Armada pounded outer forts, Nusret had slipped out silently at night. Its captain, a young officer with keen tactical instincts, had noticed a pattern. British ships would steam up the straits, fire their guns, then turn starboard into Erenköy Bay to retreat and let the next ship wave come in. Nusret laid a line of 26 naval mines, not across the channel as was standard, but parallel to the shore, right in the British fleet's maneuvering area. On March the 18th, 1915, the British launched their main attack. 18 battleships steamed into the straits in 3 waves. They silenced the forts. Admiral de Robeck, the British commander, thought he had won. Victory seemed within reach. He ordered the French squadron to turn back and the British reserve squadron to move forward. The French battleship Bouvet turned into Erenköy Bay. At 1:54 p.m., a massive explosion ripped the ocean apart. A water and flame column shot hundreds of feet skyward. Bouvet had struck one of Nusret's mines. The ship broke in half. In less than 2 minutes, it capsized and vanished beneath the waves, taking 600 French sailors with it. The British thought it was a torpedo or a lucky shell from the forts. They didn't realize they were drifting into a minefield. Minutes later, British battleship HMS Irresistible struck a mine. A huge hole was blown in its hull. Then, HMS Ocean struck a mine. Battlecruiser HMS Inflexible struck a mine and began listing heavily, water pouring into its compartments. Panic seized the fleet. In a single afternoon, the Allies had lost 3 capital ships and had 3 more crippled. 1/3 of the fleet was out of action. The mighty Royal Navy, which had ruled the waves for a century, had been defeated by a tiny mine layer and its commander's hubris. Churchill was devastated. The naval attack was called off, yet the Allies could not walk away. Too much prestige was at stake. They decided that if ships couldn't do it, soldiers would have to. This led to the Gallipoli land invasion. On April the 25th, 1915, Allied troops, British, Australian, New Zealand, French, and Indian, stormed the beaches. They expected a march to Istanbul in a week. Instead, they found themselves pinned down on narrow strips of sand and rock, exposed to murderous fire from the heights above. Ottoman soldiers led by Mustafa Kemal fought with the desperation of men defending their last home. They held the high ground. For 8 months, the campaign became a meat grinder. It was trench warfare in Mediterranean summer heat. Dysentery and flies killed as many men as bullets. Bodies rotted in no man's land. By the time the Allies evacuated in defeat in January 1916, over 500,000 men were dead or wounded. The beaches were graveyards. The dream of quick victory had turned into a nightmare. Winston Churchill was the political casualty. He was forced to resign as First Lord of the Admiralty. He was scapegoated for the disaster. He left London in disgrace and went to serve as a battalion commander in the Western Front trenches, trying to wash away Gallipoli's stain in Flanders mud. The stolen ship's ghost haunted him for years. Yet the war continued. Sultan Osman, now Agincourt, survived the Dardanelles. She was sent north to join the Grand Fleet at Scapa Flow in the Orkney Islands. On May the 31st, 1916, Agincourt sailed out to meet the German High Seas Fleet at the Battle of Jutland, history's largest naval clash. Over 200 ships engaged in a massive fleet action in the North Sea's cold waters. Agincourt was a strange beast in the British line. British sailors called it Gin Palace, because its fittings were luxurious, meant for Ottoman officers. The captain's quarters had ornate woodwork. Yet in battle, it was a monster. During Jutland's night action, Agincourt found itself close to the German battle line. The captain gave the order to open fire. Agincourt did something no other ship had ever done. It fired all 14 of its 12-inch guns at once, a full broadside. The flash was so bright that observers on other ships thought Agincourt had blown up. The recoil was so violent that it shattered galley crockery and stripped paint off the deck. Yet the ship held together. It hurled 7 tons of steel at the Germans in seconds. It was a terrifying display of the power the Ottomans had sought to possess. Yet tactical victories at sea could not save the Ottoman Empire on land. The empire was bleeding from 1,000 wounds. The war dragged on for 4 brutal years. The British blockade starved Ottoman cities. Food became scarce. Inflation soared. The Arab revolt, fueled by British gold and independence promises, tore away southern provinces. T.E. Lawrence, the famed Lawrence of Arabia, rallied Arab tribes against Ottoman rule. Jerusalem fell to General Allenby in December 1917. Baghdad fell. Damascus fell. The empire was collapsing from within and without. By 1918, Ottoman armies were exhausted. The empire was bankrupt. On October the 30th, 1918, aboard British battleship HMS Agamemnon anchored off Lemnos Island, the Ottoman delegation signed the Armistice of Mudros. It was unconditional surrender. 13 days later, on November the 13th, 1918, this tragedy's final scene played out. An Allied fleet of 60 ships sailed through the Dardanelles. Minefields had been swept. Forts were silent, their guns spiked and abandoned. They steamed past the graves of men who had died at Gallipoli. They entered the Sea of Marmara and dropped anchor in the Golden Horn directly in front of Dolmabahce Palace and Hagia Sophia. It was the first time since 1453, since Constantinople's fall to Mehmed the Conqueror, that a foreign fleet had occupied Constantinople. And there in the fleet's middle, flying the Union Jack, was HMS Agincourt. The ship had finally come home, but it had come as an executioner. For Istanbul's people watching from the hills, the sight was heartbreaking. They remembered the gold bracelets. They remembered the children's hair. They saw their own ship, the vessel that was supposed to save them, now acting as the occupation flagship. It was a symbol of total defeat. The war's aftermath reshaped the world map. The Treaty of Sèvres partitioned the Ottoman Empire like a carcass. British and French diplomats Marc Sykes and François-Georges Picot had already drawn map lines carving up the Middle East into influence zones with barely a thought for the people who lived there. Britain took Iraq and Palestine. France took Syria and Lebanon. Borders were drawn with a ruler, paying no attention to ethnic or religious realities on the ground. Kurds were left without a state, divided among Turkey, Iraq, Syria, and Iran. Arabs, who had been promised independence by Britain in exchange for their revolt, were given colonial mandates instead. The seeds of every major modern Middle East conflict, from the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to ISIS's rise, were sown in the Ottoman collapse wreckage. And what of the ships themselves? HMS Agincourt, despite its impressive Jutland performance, was never loved by the Royal Navy. It was considered a structural freak, too long, too difficult to maneuver. After the war in 1921, The British government decided to scrap it. The ship that had caused a world war, the ship that had cost millions in gold and blood, was towed to a Scottish breaker's yard. It was cut apart by acetylene torches. Its mighty guns were melted down. Its steel was recycled into razor blades, cars, and bridges. Rashadi, renamed HMS Aran, suffered the same fate. Scrapped in 1921. 2 super dreadnoughts reduced to scrap metal. Yet Goeben, the German ship that had started the war, survived. Renamed Yavuz, it became the new Turkish Navy's flagship. It served the new Turkish Republic founded by Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, the hero of Gallipoli, who transformed Turkey into a modern nation. When Ataturk died in 1938, his body was carried on Yavuz's deck in a final salute. It remained in service until the 1950s, the Great War's last surviving battlecruiser. It was finally scrapped in 1973, a lingering ghost of the imperial age. As we look back at this story a century later, the question remains, was it worth it? Winston Churchill believed he did the right thing. He secured the North Sea naval balance. He ensured the Royal Navy had the victory margin. From a purely British naval perspective, the seizure was a success. Agincourt fought at Jutland and contributed to British naval supremacy. Yet the geopolitical cost was incalculable. If Churchill had allowed the ships to sail, the Ottoman Empire might have remained neutral. The pro-British faction in the government would have been strengthened. The Dardanelles would have remained open, allowing supplies to reach Russia. Russia might have been stronger, better equipped to withstand German offensives. Without Ottoman entry into the war, the conflict's entire character would have changed. The war would have been shorter. Millions of lives might have been saved. The Russian Revolution might have been averted or delayed, changing the entire 20th century's course. The Middle East map would look completely different today. There might have been no Iraq, no Syria, no Palestine mandate,